I grew up in a family that was certainly, a great from an emotional standpoint, but we just didn't talk about money. It was not something that was ever on the table. And as I got into business, I really learned that it was pivotal that I have a really good grasp on cash flow and how to save money. And I just found that there was a lack of information out there for entrepreneurs and business owners and freelancers to really know how to build lasting wealth, right? All the content out there is about, hey, make more profit, add more to the bottom line. But there wasn't a whole lot about that next stage, building generational wealth. And so, as you mentioned in the bio, as I started to sell my first company and continued to go on my own wealth building journey, I interviewed a lot of people and found one particular strategy, what we call leverage wealth accounts, that involves a very specific type of life insurance account, believe it or not. And this was just something that I found that was lesser known, and it was transformational for me. And I just got the calling to try to help other people with this. I talk about it constantly in my friend circles and families, and their eyes glaze over when I start talking about it. But I just have a passion for helping people. And when they do have that light bulb moment, when they realize that banks and the IRS and these things, there's a method to the madness. And if you don't know that rule book, if you don't have the playbook, you're going to get stepped on and you're going to live a life of running on that hamster wheel, right? And so my passion is really for helping people to see and have some of those enlightening moments and hopefully adopt some strategies that help them move forward.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hello, Team PYP. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to another episode of the Play Your Position podcast. It's game day here at PYP today, and that means I have an amazing guest who is suited up and ready to take us on a journey into the wealth building industry. And who doesn't like to talk about making your money do more for you? His name is Sean Adams. Sean, are you ready for kickoff?
I'm ready, Mary Lou. Thanks for having me.
I am excited to have you today, Sean. So team, here are some things I know about Sean. In 12 years of owning multiple small businesses, Sean Adams felt overwhelming stress stemming from the government and banks having control over his income. He consumed hundreds of books, interviews, and courses to learn as much as he could about finance, and discovered the ultra-rich had insider knowledge about protecting and growing wealth. Sean made it his mission to distill down these secrets and make sure everyone had access to them. This led him to found Leveraged Life Management in order to help other professionals leverage a time-tested wealth-building strategy of the ultra-rich. He is talking to us today from Southern New Jersey, and I'm just really excited, Sean, that you are taking time today to take us into your world and share with us what you know about building wealth.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, describe for listeners, Sean. This is always my first question. It's good to get your backstory. When did you get the call to leadership? And what is it like to be someone who plays your position in the role that you're in, the leveraged life management? Let's hear about that.
Yeah, Mary Lou, I'd love to say I was born and had this desire to talk about financial literacy as a career. That certainly was not the case. I was drawn, however, to autonomy, though. So from an early age, I really fell in love with entrepreneurship. As you mentioned, I launched a couple of small businesses. First one was actually in high school. I was pushing lawnmowers around the neighborhood and scaled up my first contracting and service business. That's really where I cut my teeth in this whole world of one, being able to call my own shots and having sales and marketing be a part of my day-to-day, and just seeing the vast majority of opportunities that are out there in this amazing country we live in. And I kind of stumbled in backwards to the leadership in the traditional sense, and having to have employees and guide clients through, a sales process and understand all the interworkings of being an entrepreneur. And so it took me years to learn the hard way what not to do and pick up some of those time tested. And one of those was financial literacy. I grew up in a family that was certainly, a great from an emotional standpoint, but we just didn't talk about money. It was not something that was ever on the table. And as I got into business, I really learned that it was pivotal that I have a really good grasp on cash flow and how to save money. And I just found that there was a lack of information out there for entrepreneurs and business owners and freelancers to really know how to build lasting wealth, right? All the content out there is about, hey, make more profit, add more to the bottom line. But there wasn't a whole lot about that next stage, building generational wealth. And so, as you mentioned in the bio, as I started to sell my first company and continued to go on my own wealth building journey, I interviewed a lot of people and found one particular strategy, what we call leverage wealth accounts, that involves a very specific type of life insurance account, believe it or not. And this was just something that I found that was lesser known, and it was transformational for me. And I just got the calling to try to help other people with this. I talk about it constantly in my friend circles and families, and their eyes glaze over when I start talking about it. But I just have a passion for helping people. And when they do have that light bulb moment, when they realize that banks and the IRS and these things, there's a method to the madness. And if you don't know that rule book, if you don't have the playbook, you're going to get stepped on and you're going to live a life of running on that hamster wheel, right? And so my passion is really for helping people to see and have some of those enlightening moments and hopefully adopt some strategies that help them move forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can hear it in your voice how passionate you are about what you do, and this getting out information that isn't readily available or isn't promoted. And financial literacy has been something that, if you're in the entrepreneurial space, it's hard not to stumble across somebody having a conversation about it, because when you stop working for someone, if you make that transition, or if you, like yourself, I love that you said you were drawn to autonomy from a young age. And I think that's a characteristic of most entrepreneurs, is that we know at some gut level that being corralled, within a system isn't really for us. And it's not that maybe we don't dabble in it here and there, but at some point, I think true entrepreneurs do discover, hey, I got to run my own show. Well, running your own show involves managing your money. And it isn't just about cash flow. It isn't just about how to improve that profit margin, as you were talking about. So what is it about this one particular thing that you found that can make such a big difference for people who are freelancing, solopreneuring, or maybe even building a small business where they have employees?
Yeah, so the first place I would start is the understanding that as business owners or someone who doesn't get a 9-to-5 paycheck every Friday or every other Friday, it's extremely difficult to get money to come into our bank accounts. We have to chase people down. We have to wait. We've got, payment terms, and we've got all these crazy things that are impediments to us actually making our income, right? It might say it on paper, but we don't actually see the money often until months down the line. And so what really scared me was when I would talk to financial advisors and they would say, well, stick it in the stock market. You might see some ups and downs, but over the long term, it's going to even out. And it was very nauseating to me to see where I would throw this hard-earned money that was so difficult to get into my hands and then sort of roll the dice on some investment that somebody else said may be a good idea, right? And so I hated that lack of control and the idea that it very well could go down, it could lose value. And so I really did not like that idea. And what drew me to studying billionaires and ultra successful people is I found that they too did not want someone else to have their thumb on their money. They were in no way going to make sure they had some kind of risk mitigation, some downside protection. And what I kept hearing time after time was that they had this type of policy, which is essentially just a large, very specifically designed and engineered type of whole life insurance that was like this incredible life blanket. It was this umbrella that was obviously a death benefit protection in case anything happened to them. But more importantly, it had all these living benefits like protection if the stock market goes down. There was a guaranteed growth element that was completely non-correlated to what was going on in the markets. It was also basically a private contract between you and the carrier. And therefore, if there was bankruptcies even divorce or some kind of creditor litigation, it was basically off the table. It's almost a private engagement with you and this carrier. And so there was just these additional bullet points that made it a great vehicle to store cash in, where I didn't have to worry that something was going to happen, that someone else's decisions or some outside factor was going to control, next week, next quarter, or more importantly, my retirement years. I wanted to make sure I was building those blocks. And that's where the strategy really came in and was successful for me, because I call it my sleep well at night account, right? It's not a home run, but it gives me the peace of mind to know that my money is sitting somewhere safe and it's liquid, so I can make investments, but I can make an unemotional decision about those investments because I have sort of this safety net in place. I have my downside mitigated. And if you look at the ultra successful investors, people like Warren Buffett and these big names, they are always playing that risk mitigation side, that whole game. I think it's really important that we think about that at any budget. You don't have to be a billionaire to think that way.
Mm-hmm. That was going to be my next question is, it's great when we talk about people like Warren Buffett and Mark Cuban and all the Shark Tank people who had a big payday because they built a company and then sold it for gazillions of dollars. Right now, they're just flush with cash. And the reality is what you said just a few minutes ago is most people who are on their own and pursuing a dream of either building a lifestyle business or actually building a company that they eventually will sell don't have a lot of wiggle room. There's not a lot of just piles of cash laying around like, what do I do with this, right? And so tell us about what does it take to take advantage of this lesser known vehicle? And, is it really for anybody, or are there certain benchmarks you have to meet in order to get started?
Well, first off, Mary Lou, it's a mindset, right? And so when I first sit down with an individual, I like to kind of unpack what they're currently doing. And I like to share a ridiculous amount of content with them up front to make them do some research on their own so that they don't feel like I'm pressuring them into some latest and greatest, infomercial product that's out there, right? This concept has been around since the 1880s. And it's not something that, I came up with. This has been used by the ultra successful people for 100+ years, right? But the idea is it's never been something that was advertised to everyday people. And so what I try to help people recognize is just because it wasn't in Dave Ramsey's latest book, or because it wasn't in the latest, financial journal or whatever it might be, does not mean that it's not a good strategy or it's not something worth considering. And so I always like to, every kind of financial strategy, run through your own litmus test of one, who are you trying to mirror? What are your goals, right? Are you trying to get to your 401k to a certain level? And if you're working for someone, you probably have a pretty good plan in place to get there. But when you're on your own, it's a vastly different scenario, right? We don't have someone who says, here's the plan. We're going to take money out of your account and conveniently put it here for us. That's not how it works for entrepreneurs and solopreneurs. No. So we need to have that flexibility and some protection in place. So there technically is no limit. That's what was really fascinating to me, is I figured this was something I had to have $100,000 liquid to even get into the door. And that wasn't the case at all. We set up these policies for people that are just out of college and they have a couple $100s a month. And that's where they start, right? It's really about understanding the vehicle and understanding the concepts of it, right? And what we're doing is we're just storing our cash in a different place. Instead of it being in a savings account in a bank or in something like the stock market accounts, permanently, we have this sort of, we call it like the triple play, where we have money that comes into our bank accounts and then we can store it in this policy. And if we want to then use that money for an investment in the stock market, for an investment in our business, or just to fund our lifestyle, it is liquid in that account. We can actually leverage it and use it how we want on our terms. When it's in a stock market, we have to actually sell our position to be able to use it, right? So we have someone else in control of how we use our money. And so you can use this at any limit. Of course, the more money you have, economies of scale, you're always going to see larger returns. But at any level, there is ways to start practicing these good habits and saying, okay, I want my money to be diversified in the right places, to have a policy like this that I can leverage, that first off gives me protection, right? just by putting it inside the walls of one of these policies, I instantaneously am protecting my family. I'm insulating myself and my family from risk. If something were to happen to me, I have this death benefit protection that's in place. For us entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, if we aren't in the picture, basically the entire system has a tendency to want to implode. So it's important that we have some sort of structure in place to make sure our spouse, our business partners, our employees, there's something there as a risk mitigator in case, the inevitable happens. We need to make sure we've got that protection. So I like to have people start with that mentality of risk protection and then go in and say, well, how much can you afford to put in? Is it $100 a month? Is it $10,000 a month? Where are you in that mix? And we can cater a strategy around that. So again, just to round that out, it's really about the fundamentals, understanding that we want to have it in that safe place. And the budget is something that we can structure for at almost any size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense to go at it first from a mindset perspective and then figure out. So based on what you're describing, it's something that you would contribute to monthly, yes?
Yes, monthly, quarterly, annually. Yep, it would be at a...
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, very good. So I'm curious, Sean, if this thing has been around as long as it has, why isn't it more of a common knowledge thing? Why has it been so hidden?
Yeah, absolutely.
From plain sight?
For sure. Well, to sound a little contrarian, when we talk about whole life, and you'll have some people in the audience go, whoa, I've heard nothing but terrible things about whole life insurance. And in the traditional sense, the way that it's normally set up, it is a terrible investment because the average agents, the average people selling these products are setting them up for a commission-driven sale, meaning they want to get the highest amount of premium out of you because they get the highest payday out of that. So it's a matter of not understanding the limits and the way in which these tools can be used and maximized. And so what we do is we mirror specifically what are called family offices. So if you look at someone like the Rockefellers or some of these huge families who have just unbelievable amounts of wealth, they have used these tools for so long, but the strategy's basically been exclusive to them because from a financial advisor standpoint, from an insurance agent standpoint, obviously the largest returns are with people who have the largest budgets, the largest amounts of money to work with. And so it just hasn't been advertised because if I'm a financial advisor or a life insurance agent like I am, it's a lot of work to get one individual on a small policy for, say, a couple $100s a month, where they could do the same amount of effort and legwork and have somebody who has $1 million a month to put in, right? And so it has just been catered to people who are a little more upmarket and have that budget to be able to spend. And unfortunately, that has been the reality. And when a financial advisor looks at how he can scale or he or she can scale their business, they look at things like IRAs and 401ks because they can grab 1,000 people at once, throw them in some fund, and they can make a couple % off of them. And it's almost an automated system. So when you really understand the inner workings of the financial system, big finance, you'll start to see where it is a game rigged for fees and for the advisors in a lot of ways. And I don't mean to throw them under the bus, but this is specifically the arena that I operate in. And this is why this happens because, they're in it for profit, right? This is not a nonprofit out there. And so it's really important to understand and do your due diligence on what you're actually paying, where those fees are going, and why that person's suggesting one product over another. I obviously get compensated by putting this strategy in place for people, but I can show you specifically where the way that we set this up, I cut my commissions by about 90% by setting it up the way that we do, because it's actually in the client's best interest. And I would rather basically set it up correctly where you're going to have long-term success and not come to me in 10 years and go, Sean, what the heck did you set up here for me? I've been paying money into this thing and I don't see any sort of returns. It hasn't broken even. I feel like I'm putting money into a pit in the ground. And that's how it's been sold for so long. And that's why it's got a negative connotation. It's one of the reasons why you'll see people who have either never heard of it or automatically come in with some predispositions about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate your honesty and transparency. I've had several conversations on this show over the years with folks who are in the financial sector, and across the board, they echo what you're saying is that the financial industry, like every industry, is structured as a profit generating machine, and you're going to create products and services that accomplish that goal. And because we live in a society here in the States that doesn't invest in financial literacy for our youth, unless you grow up in a home, you mentioned you guys didn't talk about money. That's still so common today. And so we send, young people are sent out into the world. And one of the first things that happens when young people go to college is they get inundated with credit card offers. Hey, there's a fresh slate. Let's get you into this. And boy, I'll tell you, it just, and that's just one example of what I think is, to use your words, a rigged system. It's always in favor of, you never hear of a credit card company saying, oh, let's see how we can help you leverage the money we're offering you so that you can go make more money.
Sure.
They just want to get the interest rate, which is a recurring income.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
Again, I'm glad that you addressed the elephant in the room, that there will be listeners who've heard of whole life insurance and are immediately triggered by that. And so, team, if you're listening to us and you're wondering, well, how is this different? Keep listening, because Sean, I think, is coming at this from a point of view that isn't the common one, that isn't the average person who's offering this kind of option for generating long-term security and wealth with your money.
Absolutely. And Mary Lou, if I could just add one thing in there, because we don't have much of a financial education system in place in this country, people have just a sort of general anxiety around managing their money and making their long-term investing, if they even have that going on. It's just an overwhelming topic for most people. So unfortunately, it plays perfectly into the financial advisor world, because what it means is I'm, Joe employee or Joe business owner. I don't really understand how money works. And I see John's a financial advisor. He's got that on his business card. John's got to know what he's talking about. I'll just outsource my financial wherewithal, my financial future to him. And what I always tell people is, you don't have to be a financial expert, but you can't outsource your future to somebody else. There has to be some level of understanding there, whether it's just the goals that you have, a superficial knowledge of how the system works. You can watch a couple of YouTube videos and get an understanding of how the economy works, how the stock market functions, how credit works. And you don't have to be an expert on it. But if you have no skin in the game, you're going to be taken advantage of. It's just the nature of the beast, right? And so I think it's important for people to recognize that this is fundamental to a freedom lifestyle. It's fundamental to, your long-term success. The decisions that you make now are setting your future self up in a certain way, right? We're knocking dominoes over now that are going to help or hurt our future self. So I think it's important to just recognize that you can't outsource all of it. There's got to be a little bit of skin in the game here so that you make sure that at least this system's working in your favor.
Mm-hmm. I think it also, to dovetail on what you just said, comes down to being able to ask intelligent questions. You brought up being able to watch a YouTube video or two, and that is both a blessing and a curse, because information is now readily available on everything. You can just Google whatever, but you don't have any context most of the time for what pops up. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of bad actors who know how to market really well. And money and managing money and growing money is, as you said, most people have zero understanding of how it works. And so they are just going to hand it over to somebody who seems like he or she knows what they're doing. And maybe it works out, right? But I know one of the reasons you're here, Sean, and talking to me and other podcast that you're appearing on is to educate, is to help people understand there are options and there are people like yourself who really do want what is available to work appropriately. And who has been someone who has influenced you? Who do you turn to when you need coaching and mentoring to help you grow?
Yeah, I like to focus on historical precedent. And so oftentimes we have the latest and greatest, like I mentioned, that come out. I've only been in this industry a couple of years. And so I never try to say that, I have this long storied career that I don't have. I would never try to fake that. And so whenever I have someone make a decision about their financial futures or anything they're going to do, I always ask them to run it through some sort of historical precedent. And what really worked for me was looking at things over 25, 30, or even 100-year periods of time, seeing where like a stock market investment versus say something in life insurance, a real estate investment in a particular type of business or industry. That was always the most impactful thing for me because we have a tendency to have a short memory. We have amnesia, right? We're in 2021 here. And if I talk to people, Mary Lou, I'm amazed that people just don't remember that 2008 happened and that it took about 4 years for the world to get back to normal. And so when we look back over 10 years, we go, oh, 2011, everything was great, right? They don't understand that the world collapsed for over 4 years there, right? And they don't understand that some of the things that are going are just riding a wave of innovation. So to your question, I like to look for products, people, mentors that have stood the test of time for 30, 40 plus years. And so, when I look and I study history, I look at things like the Rockefeller families. There's a great book by a gentleman named Garrett Gunderson. He wrote a book called What Would the Rockefellers Do? And he shows this comparison of the Rockefeller families compared to the Vanderbilt families and the series of decisions they made and how they managed their wealth and how the Rockefellers today have over 150 people still living off of that initial inheritance from the 1910s, where the Vanderbilts went bankrupt in like the 1940s and 50s, right? And so you just see the historical precedent and where those decisions were. And they stood the test of time through all these different ups and downs that we've had in our economy. So I look to gentlemen like that who really unpack historical data. Obviously, people like Warren Buffett, he's in his 80s. He still looks and makes decisions on a 30 to 50-year time horizon. So he looks at, his investment in XYZ firm and he goes, do I still believe that is going to be successful 50 years from now? Mm-hmm. And it's just this culmination of unemotional resources. Like he pulls things out and he's able to just wait it out by having the largest amount of data possible to make decisions. And not that Bitcoin and all these other crazy things are, not that they're bad investments, but just for me personally, I need more conviction in historical precedent. And it's hard when there is so much volatility, so many just things pulling in different directions, with social media. Riding that roller coaster to me is a little too nauseating. So I look for those things in mentorship and who can help point me in the right direction.
Nice. Oh, I'm just laughing about Bitcoin because I don't remember even how, 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago, I think I bought $50 worth of Bitcoin. And I'll tell you, it's been fun to watch it go up and down. I did it like when you go to a casino. Sure. I did it at knowing it was fun, right? That if I lost everything, that I was willing to accept that. But I do know that again, talking about YouTube and the just array of messages that are getting thrown out there about all these new sexy new things that are coming along. And I think your approach is much wiser, is that you've got to look at history because, I think of the musical Hamilton, history has its eyes on you, right? Like everything that's happened is going to happen again. We're just going to be dressed in different clothes and holding different gadgets in our hands. It's the nature of the way life works. And so that's the thing. I didn't know that about the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts, who were contemporaries, for those listening who aren't familiar with those two families. They would be akin to, they were building, steel and railroads and all that those kinds of networks, right? Today we have tech networks like the Zuckerbergs and the Musks of the 21st century. It'll be interesting to see where what kind of generational wealth those families either do well with or completely squander, which comes back to mindset, which you brought earlier. And speaking of mindset, Sean, I would love for you to tell us about a time when things did not go according to your plan, when you found yourself playing out a position, you were metaphorically sacked, you fumbled the ball, or you got intercepted. What happened, and what was the lesson you learned from that experience?
Gosh, I have to narrow it down to just one. Oh man, it's going to be a tough one. I would say there's a particular instance that happened when I was doing some investing in the stock market very early on, before when I was just kind of cutting my teeth in this financial education world, and I got scooped up in the latest and greatest kind of day trading, and it wasn't a massive hit, but it was enough where I looked and thought, what the hell am I doing here? I was making emotional decisions based on the sexiness, the appeal of looking into these quick turnarounds without any sort of fundamentals in place, right? So, for those of you who don't know, day trading has many different elements to it, but one of them is momentum based. And sometimes it's just a matter of scale, right? So like a certain audience may buy into a stock, it goes up in value or goes down in value, and you can play that game and sort of time that properly. And there were several instances where I got my butt handed to me, just not understanding the rules of the game and thinking that this was a shortcut, and not using some of those fundamentals, lessons that I learned from my mentors, like I said, about thinking about the 30-year plan, right? That's not very exciting when you're talking about today and tomorrow. You don't want to think about 30 years from now. But I find that it's helpful in taking the emotions out of the current decision you're about to make, right? And so how this is going to affect my future self. And that's when I started to go, okay, I'm taking some burns here. I'm losing money, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. Again, going back to my early business owner days, I'm rolling the dice here and putting my future in someone else's hands or some other market's hands. And that's never a good place to be, right? Because you don't have any protection, no mitigation there. You're over leveraged. I named my firm Leverage Life Management because leverage is an incredible tool to use if you know how to use it properly. But there's also over leverage, meaning you don't understand the rules, or someone else has their thumb on you, or you've overcommitted. There's a million different ways to back into this. And so the reason why I use that word leverage is because I think it has a dichotomy to it, right? There's an element where we've taken out too much debt, we've gotten in over our heads, or understood that leverage and investing in the right things can be so transformational to us, right? Investing in the right people, helping to nurture an individual who's going to work for you or be a long-term partner, investing in a software or a tool that's going to help you level up and leverage your time, through automations and those sort of things. And so I'd say the biggest failure was just thinking in the short term without recognizing the long-term repercussions. Getting caught up in those emotional things on the short term was really what did me in.
Yes, boy, when we behave, in high emotional states, the outcome is usually when you look back, you go, "Wow, I would go back and change that," right? Especially with money. And again, for a lot of people, you work with people all day long who are wanting to do something with their money. And some people are so afraid of parting with their money, right? And then there are people who are so almost out of touch with how much risk they're taking that they're putting themselves in danger. So it's like, you don't want to be on either extreme, right? You want to find some sweet spot in the middle where you take some risks and sometimes they work out and sometimes they don't. And then you have that, I think you use the word, that blanket that is there for when you need it. And I think that's the holy grail, right? To find that spot. And it sounds like that's the mission you're on with your business. And I'm curious, here we are in 2021, and we all know that, speaking of history, 100 years ago, what did we experience in this country? The roaring 20s, where there was a lot of growth. And there are experts that I read who are predicting that we'll have our 2020s, our roaring 2020s, what do you see when you look into your crystal ball, Sean, about what is going to have the biggest impact on the way we grow our money and maybe even earn our money in the next 5 to 10 years, these 2020s that we're in?
Gosh, I certainly don't have a crystal ball and don't claim to be an oracle with this sort of thing. But again, I'll just keep going back to my fundamentals, which are to stick to the fundamentals, which seems kind of repetitive. But for me, when I look at maybe asset classes, I tend to flock towards things like real estate, tried and true methods, but with and through the lens of those fundamentals. So what I mean by that is right now in the real estate world, I don't care what state you're in, you're seeing some wacky things go on, right? You're seeing outrageous prices, people paying 20, 30, 50% over asking prices. Those sort of things are not sustainable. And they're also red flags for where we were, say, in the 2005, 6, 7 mark, where things were a little top heavy. So I do see a bit of a correction happening in those ancillary markets, like real estate. And while you're seeing so many sort of asset-based consumer goods, like, baseball cards and rare cars and all these sort of things, getting additional attention is because of the uncertainty with inflation and the uncertainty with the dollar, right? So I think we're going to still see people diversifying in things, alternative asset classes like that. And I don't think that's a bad move, but I think it's, as they say in real estate, you make money when you buy, right? And so you have to be buying at the right price. And I think it's important to have this mindset of, I'm going to look at 100 deals and pick one that makes the most sense and have a very strict sort of qualification process for where we stick our funds. Everything that we teach, Mary Lou, in terms of storing and warehousing cash, it's just that. When we say a life insurance policy, this isn't some end investment you're going to stick your money in and get 4% growth and never have to see it again, right? That's not really enough typically over a long enough period of time. But what it is it's guaranteed. And so basically I look at it as a warehouse. And when we store our cash there, it gives us that peace of mind, like I mentioned, to make those strategic investments. We can leverage the money and use it in other places and invest in things where we see opportunities. So I think there's going to be a huge opportunity in, like I said, the real estate market once the prices kind of get back to normal. I also see an unbelievable opportunity in small business because, one, we just went through an unbelievable time with, the coronavirus, so many small businesses that aren't going to make it or that are on the ropes. And we have baby boomers that are retiring at a rate of about 10,000 per day for the next 10 years or so. That is going to drastically affect opportunities happening in different markets, such as aging out business owners who are just tired and their children don't want to take over these companies. You're also going to see opportunities where they may just be giving away assets or pieces of their business or real estate stores, things like that, because it's just too cumbersome for them to deal with. And they don't know that they have, and they're sitting on something that's worthwhile. So those are some areas where I think we can uncover opportunities, even if there is some volatility going on in the broader markets.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's always going to be some volatility. That's just part of nature, right? We have volatile weather patterns and then we have periods of calm. So I think what you're sharing is wise. And again, I'm not asking you to say this is how it's going to be. I mean, I would never ask that of anybody. I think it's just fun to make some predictions. And again, you tend to go to historical trends and see the patterns that we've witnessed in the past. And I mean, where I live, as far as real estate goes, it is exactly like you described. There isn't enough inventory for one. And so if a homeowner is selling and it's in an area that is particularly popular, they are going to get quite a bit over asking. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see when this market, as hot as it is, begins to cool down and if prices level out. I think time will tell. For sure. So, and then the thing about the baby boomers, I feel like I've been hearing the stat you shared for a long time, but there's so many of them and people are working longer. There's a lot of, my uncle, for example, is a baby boomer and he's in his mid 70s and he's loves working. He's not going to retire. He's just going to keep going, But but there are a lot, or you described it perfectly, they're tired. They want to enjoy family, grandkids, travel, now that things are opening up again. People are really itchy to get out there, go places again. So all of these things play into all of it, doesn't it?
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, Sean, we're at the part of the show I call touchdown, which means I'm putting you in the red zone. And with less than 30 seconds left on the clock, you don't have many options here because you're down by 4 points and it's pretty much now or never. So could you tell us a story about a time when you metaphorically got that ball into the end zone for the game-winning touchdown?
Yeah, I would say that one particular instance comes to mind where we were on a particularly difficult customer project. This was back in my business owner days, and we kind of had to pull out all the stops, and we were basically over budget already, and we were going to be losing money on the deal. And I remember having to kind of rally the entire team, kind of on your whole topic of leadership, get everyone bought in that the best way to serve our client was really to just, we ended up spending the night at this property and trying to get all the renovations done. Basically, even though it was not going to help our bottom line today, the goodwill that we built by sticking it out, finishing up that project and making sure we met the deadline and the client was happy, and that the whole deal and project was able to stay on course at the macro level was well worth it. While during it was very miserable and was not comfortable. I think the wherewithal and some of the culture we had built throughout that time of, look, we're gonna be larger than this moment. We're gonna say, look, we're gonna put in, give it our all now because it's going to, knock over future dominoes, as I keep saying. And I think that was a big one for saying, look, we'll pull an all-nighter, we'll pull out all the resources, we'll lose money on this deal because what we're actually gaining on the back end is much larger than that.
I love that. Larger than this moment. That's a great mindset for so many things. And the word goodwill, boy, goodwill goes a long way. So it sounds like it was a win despite how challenging it was in the moment, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. One of those things that bears fruit, a year or two later, but you kind of left with the good karma, right? That's like how you slept at night, that you felt like maybe you lost the battle, but maybe won the war, that sort of mentality.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something to be said for that. Yeah. Well, as we wrap things up, Sean, I love my guests to leave Team PYP with 1 to 3 key offensive strategies that they can use right away to make some forward progress in their work and life. And since we've been talking a lot about wealth building and money today, why don't you share some 1 to 3 tips that about growing money that people could consider, actionable right now?
Yeah, the first thing I always tell people is to challenge conventional wisdom, right? Just because it's said by the masses with the loudest voices doesn't mean it is universally applicable, right? And so when one of these large pundits says something about what you should do in terms of insurance or savings accounts or types of brokerage accounts, whatever it might be, it's impossible to give blanket advice to 360 million people in this country, right? Everyone from such wide-ranging backgrounds, incomes, goals, ages. There is no universal advice. Unfortunately, though, because they are the loudest voice in a crowded room, people tend to flock that direction. So I always tell people, not all advice is created equal. Make sure you're seeking out advice that has precedent in your scenario. If you're into real estate and that is your lane, look up successful stories in that industry, not something that is for the 9-to-5er, right? And a lot of the advice out there is for people that have a 401k who someone else is helping pull the levers for them. So I always suggest going through and doing your due diligence on that side. And, we talk about the 5 levers of wealth, but essentially it's the idea of looking for more than one dimension of wealth. Building rate of return, kind of what we get from a profit margin standpoint or growth on our money is an excellent probably top tier metric to track. What am I getting year over year? But more importantly, we need to think about things like taxes. We need to think about things like legacy planning. When it comes time for retirement, if something were to happen to us, where and how does our money get transferred to the next generation, to our spouse, business partners, children? Most people don't think about their money through these different dimensions. They just look at, well, what's the highest rate of return? And what they fail to mention is over the long term, if put in the wrong strategy, they may be shooting themselves in the foot for taxes, right? So, hey, I made 18% in my 401k, over the course of this 30-year period. Now I'm 65. I go to take this money out and I'm hit with a 35% tax bill, right? So you only focused on one metric and you lost out in the long game because there's more than one dimension of building wealth. And so using those sort of logics to go, okay, fundamentally, I know I've got, the rate of return. I need to learn about my taxes. I need to understand how and where this money is going to be transferred if anything happens to me. And I want to make sure I have leverage to use it on my terms. I think that's very, very important for business owners and anyone who's, running their own show. A lot of the financial advice out there, it will purposefully actually block you and limit your control over your money because they're applying to general people who basically are not good savers. So they're trying to go ahead and kind of block their ability to do anything with their money. And so I just think it's important to get true pointed advice for your unique situation.
Wonderful. Great tips. Great tips. And for people who'd like to learn more about you, Sean, where do you hang out online?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's probably the biggest source for me. You can find me, Sean, Sean Adams. If you go to my website, leveraged-life.com, I always focus on content, like I mentioned. So there's an entire crash course on there. It's completely free. You don't even need your email to get in. Just click on a button. And I have about 30 different videos breaking down all kinds of different topics that we've covered here today, just to give you some insights into, historical precedents, how these tools are used, and maybe just some contrarian thinking on financial planning and wealth building. So that's a great place to go just to kind of get the juices flowing.
Love it. Thank you so much for that. And team, the links to connect with Sean will be on his show notes page at pyppodcast.com. And take advantage of these wonderful resources that he has so thoughtfully put together to educate you and people you love about making your money work for you in the way you really want it to, which is, that's all we really want, right? Live our lives, do what we like, more of it. And you need money to do it. So that's been great. And before we say goodbye, Sean, tell us about a book that you're either reading right now or one that has made a big impact on you.
Yeah, I would say that the book I mentioned initially, What Would the Rockefellers Do, is a great book to kind of understand generational wealth and how ultra wealthy people think about building that sort of scale and legacy. There's another book called Becoming Your Own Banker. If you really want to unpack this whole life insurance side, that's a very particular book that by Nelson Nash that goes into detail there. And then the last one that I would mention is a book called The Go-Giver. Not really a finance book. It's really more of a business, personal development book. It talks mainly about sales concepts, but it's really about this concept of doing the right things for people up front and without asking for anything in return. And I think it's really important just mindset wise to think about that. We're giving out value. We're serving people first. And I think that great things come from that. So The Go-Giver would be another just kind of all around, well-rounded book that I always push people to.
Nice. Yeah. I'll put links to those books on your show notes page too, because I know Team PYP are readers. So thank you for those so much. And Sean, thank you so much for showing up today and bringing your best game to all of us here at Play Your Position. I appreciate the work you do, your contrarian thinking, your desire to educate people about other options and to steer people away from less than, I would say, honest practices. You're a straight shooter, and that's really cool.
Mary Lou, thanks so much. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.